Part 30. Hong Kong movies, I can see the loyalty value, I am not panicked at all. Author, Ban Wanqing Buletin Liang. Chapter 291. Wang Li supported his wife and walked forward cautiously. He didn't know where he was going. Javanese people were burning, killing and looting everywhere, and no place was safe. He suddenly felt regretful. He would have known that sneaking to Xiangjiang and Hejiang would be much safer than here. A sense of despair welled up in my heart, that the government of this country would help the evildoers like last time. Let's go to the dock. As long as there is a boat, no matter where we go. Let's all go, as long as we leave here, Wang Li said through gritted teeth. Wang Li secretly observed the street. He had been walking through alleys without being discovered, but if he wanted to go to the dock, he had to cross Central Street, which was several hundred meters away. There was no movement on the street, but there were constant screams in the residential buildings not far away. It was obvious that most people had rushed into the residential buildings to search for the Chinese. Come on, wifey. Just rush across the street and we can get to the dock. He kept cheering his wife up. Although he didn't know whether he could survive, he couldn't sit still and wait for death for the sake of his wife and their unborn child. His wife was almost exhausted after running around for a long time. Chiang braced himself and walked towards Central Street with Wang Li's support. Quick, there are two more people there. Tens of meters behind him, a dozen thugs with murderous weapons suddenly rushed out and shouted. Wang Li turned his head and glanced, feeling anxious, and quickly dragged his wife to a hidden alley. His survival instinct gave him a surge of adrenaline, but that was all. The thugs behind him were already chasing him. Wang Li looked desperately at the thugs who were getting closer and closer. All he could do now was to stand in front of his wife, at least not to let her get any harm before he died. You bastards, come here. Wang Li picked up the wooden stick on the ground and stood in front of him. Suddenly, several off-road vehicles came quickly from a distance and rushed towards Wang Li without slowing down. The thugs turned their heads subconsciously, and this turn decided their fate. Every thug was hit by an off-road vehicle and scattered like a goddess. Wang Li only heard a bang-bang impact and a dull sound of landing. Tisk, the first car stopped in front of Wang Li. Wang Li stared at the bumper of the off-road vehicle in horror. The metal bumper was stained with blood and mixed with half a skull with hair on it. The car door opened slowly, and a carefree young man got out. Hey, you guys are in luck. My eldest brother said you are a man, do you want to get in the car? Then he waved to the motorcade behind him and said, brother said, don't let anyone go. I saw several cars behind them starting to back up and turn, and then mercilessly crushed the Javanese thugs who fell to the ground and groaned. Seeing this scene, Wang Li and his wife could no longer bear the churning of their stomachs and vomited until they emptied their stomachs of the food residue. The people who came were none other than Li Qing and his party. Along the way, the convoy encountered many thugs blocking their way, some of whom had Molotov cocktails in their hands. However, they were able to deal with them, and they also saved some Chinese people and allowed them to escape. It was only when they approached the ferry port that they discovered Wang Li and his wife. Thank you, thank you. Wang Li supported his wife, carefully got into the car, and thanked everyone in the car. He didn't know who the other person was, but it was safer than being on the street. Well, you're welcome. You are considered a man, Li Qing said in a deep voice with a smile. After about a few minutes, several cars behind slowly followed up, leaving streaks of tire blood on Central Street. Brother, there is Nick Village ahead. John Candon identified it. The ferry port is a relatively large port, and due to military traffic control, it must be heavily guarded. We had no choice but to do the next best thing and arrange for the smuggling boat to dock at the small dock next to Nick Village. As long as you pass through Nick Village, you can reach the dock. Our ship will arrive in 1 hour. John Candon looked at his watch and whispered. Li Qing signaled to continue moving forward, and the convoy slowly drove into the small road. There were no lights on the small road, and the surrounding area became dark. Think after a moment, the car tilted slightly as if it had hit something, and then the car slowly stopped. The boy driving the car said with an ugly face, "Brother, the tire is flat." "Ajin, get out of the car and take a look." "Be careful." Gao Jin nodded, opened the car door and carefully stepped out of the car, came to the tire, squatted down, and looked at the ground through the car lights. His eyes narrowed, then he picked up a small gadget from the ground. "Brother, triangular nail." "Damn it, those bitches were already on guard." Crow patted the cushion angrily. Li Qing looked calm. "Tell the brothers behind you to turn off the lights, grab the guy and we'll walk over. There must be more triangular spikes ahead of the section of road. It is impossible to drive through them. It is better to go through them in the dark." After walking for about a few hundred meters, as Li Qing expected, several cars were parked crookedly in the woods on the roadside. Maybe he had the same idea as Li Qing and others, to leave Java by boat at night. "Brother, it seems that those people have been caught by the people in the village." Zhang Qiandan whispered in Li Qing's ear. Li Qing nodded. Nick village was dangerous to ordinary people, but it was nothing to them. After all, everyone had a gun in their hand. "Ajin, take someone to touch it and see what's going on." "Okay, brother." Gao Jin waved his hand, and several of his younger brothers immediately followed him, taking advantage of the darkness and heading towards Nick village not far away. Gao Jin was worthy of being a scout. He approached the village and raised his right hand to make a fist. The people behind him immediately stopped. From a distance, there were several people at the end of the village holding guns, smoking, and laughing. Gao Jin signaled, slowly pulled out the dagger and led someone to touch it quietly. "Haha, Chinese girls have really good skin. That chick just now was so tight." "Nonsense, that's the daughter of a wealthy Chinese businessman. You've benefited greatly." "You also said, isn't her mother more delicious?" "Humph, if you ask me, you should kill them all. I heard from the village chief that the reward for killing a Chinese is 10,000 Indonesian rupiah, and killing a Chinese woman is rewarded 20,000 Indonesian rupiah. Shh, keep your voice down. The village chief won't let you talk. Why are you so quiet? Are you going out?" Before he could finish speaking, a dagger was stabbed into his throat. Several other people quickly raised their guns, but it was already too late. Several figures jumped out from the grass and threw them to the ground, neatly wiping their necks. "Brother Jin, are they telling the truth?" There was indignation in the eyes of several younger brothers. Although the blood of the Javanese Chinese had been diluted, there was still Chinese blood after all, which was difficult for them as compatriots to accept. What is the difference between this and the skull bounties placed on Indians in the United States hundreds of years ago? Gao Jin was silent for a moment. "You guys hide well, I'll go back and tell the boss." Hong Kong movies, I can see the loyalty value, I am not panicked at all. Author, Ban Wanqing Buletin Liang. Chapter 292. Gao Jin rushed to Li Qing with an ugly expression. "Brother, there is indeed a problem in this village. I'm afraid all the people in the car in front have been arrested." "And?" Li Qing frowned, hesitant. "And what?" "It seems that the Javanese government is involved in this riot. They said that killing a Chinese will reward 10,000 Javanese guilders, and killing a Chinese woman will reward 20,000 Javanese guilders." After hearing this, Crow and the others behind Li Qing looked furious and wanted to kill everyone in the village. Li Qing's face was calm, and his eyes were as deep as the abyss, making people shudder just by looking at him. "Let's go and have a look." Li Qing took the lead and walked forward. At this time, a courtyard somewhere in the village was in full swing, with young and middle-aged men from the whole village gathered, lining up with smiles on their faces. "Hey, how many stores did you rob today?" "Haha, there are only 2 of them, and they got a lot of good things. I didn't go to the store. I went directly to the Chinese residence. Did you see? I was the only one who could carry a little girl inside. Her parents were killed by me. The short Javanese man pointed at the screaming Chinese woman in the room. He was so proud that he not only led his men to kill the girl's parents, but also found several gold bars from their home. The screams of women inside the house continued, which was in sharp contrast to the lively chatter and laughter outside the house. A skinny old man, smoking a cigarette, looked at all this with a smile. He is the mayor of Nick Village, which means that now that he is old, that thing is no longer useful, otherwise he would still have to compete with young people. 30 years ago, he did this kind of thing a lot. The reason why his family has lived so well these years is because he robbed wealthy Chinese businessmen 30 years ago. He is now very grateful to the Javanese government. If it does this once every 30 years, his descendants will not have to worry about their livelihood at all. After looking at the sky, he slowly walked out of the door on crutches, planning to go home and sleep, and continue to direct this group of brats to plunder the Chinese wealth tomorrow. As soon as I walked out of the door, I looked in the direction of the village and saw a few people walking over from a distance. He narrowed his eyes and said, "If you don't keep watch, what are you doing?" Angrily, he picked up his crutch and walked slowly towards the village. This time he wanted to scold these young people. The distance between the two parties was getting closer and closer, and under the moonlight the village chief finally saw clearly who was coming. The leader had an angular face, and his half-long hair was blown away by the breeze. He held a cigarette in his mouth. The flame of the cigarette flickered and smoke came out of the man's nostrils, making his whole person look like he was coming from the sky. Like a devil coming out of the red flame hell. Especially a pair of eyes, with a cold light shining in the deep black eyes. He had only seen this look on a general who killed countless people 30 years ago. He knew that look was full of disregard for life. Li Qing looked at the old man on crutches 10 meters away and stretched out his hand. Crow understood immediately, took out the dagger and handed it over. Li Qing shook the dagger in his hand and threw it out. The dagger flew towards the village chief like a bullet. "Someone is coming." Before the village chief could finish speaking, the dagger quickly shot into his open mouth, and then his whole body was carried to the wall behind him by a huge force. The huge force caused the dagger to nail the village chief to the wall deeply. Li Qing passed by the village chief who was still twitching indifferently and walked towards the courtyard. The people in the yard were still the same as before. The men lined up in twos and threes, chatting, discussing today's harvest, and laughing obscenely from time to time. They didn't even notice Li Qing and others walking into the courtyard. Li Qing and others could also hear the screams of women in the house. Taking a deep breath of the cigarette, Li Qing said coldly, "Leave no one behind." Zhang Qiandan, Wu Wu, Gao Jin, and others walked forward with their younger brother holding a gun. At this time, someone on the opposite side finally spotted Li Qing and others. "What do you do?" Bang bang bang, he was answered by the sound of rifle firing. The sound of gunfire echoed in Nick's village, and the Javanese in the house outside the courtyard screamed and ran around. But they couldn't outrun the bullets. The bullets instantly penetrated their bodies and took away the body temperature. Within minutes, all the Javanese in the compound were dead. "Qiandan, Crow, lead the men to kill all the Javanese in Nick village, don't let any of them go." Zhang Qiandan and Crow nodded and led their younger brother out of the yard. Gao Jin walked out of the room with a livid face at this time. "Brother, go and have a look." Li Qing walked into the house and lit up the corpses of Javanese people. The blood on the ground had begun to thicken. Gao Jin took Li Qing to the outhouse, where several naked bodies of Chinese men were lying on the ground. The skin on his body has turned gray and he has been dead for a long time. These men have been dead for 3 or 4 hours. As for women, Gao Jin pursed his lips and said nothing. Li Qing pushed open the door of the inner room, and found 5 naked women lying on the bed made of wooden planks. They looked at the ceiling with dull eyes, showing no reaction to the arrival of Li Qing and others. The corner of Li Qing's mouth twitched slightly. He took out the pistol from his waist and placed it gently on the table next to him. Without saying a word, he walked out of the room. Li Qing looked up at the round moon. The moon is still bright in my hometown. Gao Jin said nothing and stood silently next to Li Qing. Bang, 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 5 intermittent gunshots were heard in the house, making Gao Jin clench his fists and bloodshot eyes. Gao Jin walked into the house and retrieved the gun. Ah Jin, take people to the village to search, and don't let even the dogs go, Li Qing said coldly. Gao Jin gritted his teeth and nodded, and walked out with his younger brother. Wang Li and his wife and Xiao Wan looked at Li Qing in fear, and then lowered their heads quickly. Originally, Li Qing planned to solve it with a knife, but after hearing about Java's policy towards the Chinese, he decisively used firearms. Because firearms are the fastest weapons to slaughter animals. In addition, there was looting and burning everywhere. Even if the police and the army heard the gunshots, they would not be able to get here for a while. More than 20 minutes later, Gao Jin and others killed all the Javanese, well, all of them. Brother, what should we do with these Chinese? Crow pushed a few Chinese and came to Li Qing. After all, the eldest brother said to kill all the Javanese, but he didn't say how to deal with the Chinese. I have a question for you. How did the people in Nick village accurately find the addresses of the Chinese in the residential area? Li Qing asked in a deep voice. There are not only Chinese in the residential area, but also Javanese and other foreign immigrants. And this riot is only aimed at the Chinese, and no one else is harmed. Several people looked at each other and didn't say anything. Don't say it. Forget it, kill them all. As soon as Li Qing finished speaking, a young man stood up and pointed at the elder opposite and said, "It's him," he led the way. In the eyes of the young man, Li Qing and his people killed people like crazy, especially when he saw the man in a suit slit his brother-in-law's throat alive. He didn't want to die. You are talking nonsense. Don't say that. This matter has nothing to do with you. The address of your Chinese classmate was also revealed by you, and you. Several Chinese began to bite each other. Li Qing sighed. In fact, he had already guessed that these safe and sound Chinese either married Javanese as sons-in-law or betrayed other Chinese. After receiving Li Qing's instructions, Crow and other brothers asked several people to kneel on the ground in the direction of the house, and the bullets instantly penetrated their backs of the heads. Let's go, the boat is coming soon. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Hong Kong movies, I can see the loyalty value, I am not panicked at all. Author, Ban Wanqing Buletin Liang. Chapter 293. Although there was a moon tonight, the sea was still dark, with only unknown birds flying by quickly. Beep beep, the sound of the motor came from far away, and a boat was speeding towards the sea. Brother, the boat has arrived. Zhang Qiandan whispered in Li Qing's ear. Li Qing nodded, get ready to board the ship. The group, together with Wang Li and his wife, and Xiao Wan boarded the ship. Brother. This time, Zhang Gishan led the team. Seeing his brother board the ship, he immediately greeted him respectfully. Li Qing gave him the responsibility of the waterway. After all, he was born in the water and had a better understanding of the environment on the sea. Well, Gishan. How many guys did you bring this time? Li Qing had asked Qiandan to tell him in advance to try to bring some heavy weapons, as they might be needed. Brother, this time I specially drove the torpedo boat I got from Ermao, with 4 torpedoes and some rocket launchers. Zhang Gishan said. Li Qing nodded. Some time ago, he heard from Tian Yangsheng that he had obtained several torpedo boats that were scrapped from Ermao, and they were modified to conceal their tracks. However, they can only be used for escort, and they can't carry much stuff for smuggling. Let's go back to Biba, Li Qing said in a deep voice, looking at the sea. As the capital of Java, it is so chaotic. I don't know what's going on in Liania province. The boat slowly sailed away from the shore. In order not to attract attention, Li Qing asked Zhang Gishan to reduce the speed of the boat. According to Zhang Gishan, when he came, he found that many coast guards were patrolling. He also relied on his many years of experience to avoid the coast guard. The lights on the boat were turned off. Zhang Gishan looked at the radar on the boat and drove the boat carefully with his many years of sailing experience. But the small dot on the radar made him frown. Brother, there is a ship heading towards us. Li Qing looked at the small dot on the radar, stop sailing, turn off the motor, and see what it is. After Zhang Gishan made some operations, the boat stopped, picked up the telescope next to it, and looked in the direction of the ship by the moonlight. Brother, it seems to be a marine police escort ship. Judging from the size, the displacement should be around 1,000 tons. Zhang Gishan put down the telescope in his hand and said. Li Qing's heart sank. The displacement of the ship opposite was only a few hundred tons, which was not at the same level as the torpedo boat he was sitting on. The endurance was even more incomparable. Gishan, take the initiative and fire a torpedo to kill it. Li Qing's eyes flashed, and he decided. Otherwise, if they were targeted by this escort ship, they would not be able to run far. Zhang Gishan nodded immediately after hearing his brother's order, and turned on the torpedo button a little clumsily. After some unfamiliar operation, swoosh, a torpedo rushed towards the frigate in the distance like a sword out of its sheath. The sea level was unusually quiet, and everyone waited for a long time without hearing the explosion of the torpedo. Li Qing. Crow. Zhang Qiandan. Everyone. Zhang Gishan rubbed his hands awkwardly. It was a little unfamiliar for the first time, and I missed the target. In fact, it is difficult to miss the target with a torpedo. The front end of the torpedo is equipped with a trigger fuse and a magnetic fuse. Both fuses will be triggered when the torpedo finds the target, unless it misses the target too much. One more shot, there will be no problem this time, trust me. Zhang Gishan patted his chest and promised. Another operation, a little more skilled than the last time, swoosh, another torpedo. Then, well, there was no more, and there was still no movement. I don't believe you. If you miss the opponent again, he will be in front of us. Crow looked at Zhang Gishan with contempt. Brother, I think we should sail away, Zhang Qiandan suggested beside him. Gishan, fire one more round. If you miss, leave quickly. Li Qing glanced at the frigate whose outline had already appeared. Zhang Gishan nodded solemnly, took a deep breath, and whoosh, another torpedo was launched. Everyone looked at the frigate not far away nervously. Boom, in the dark night, flames splashed and explosions were heard from the frigate. Everyone cheered, and the frigate began to turn around and plan to escape to the dock. Zhang Gishan's confidence increased greatly, and he fired the last torpedo. Another huge roar caused the frigate to explode, and the frigate was completely immobile. It began to tilt crookedly, and Li Qing took a look, drive over and shoot at will. Everyone was also eager to fight. They hadn't killed enough in Nick village just now, especially Gao Jian, whose mind was full of the 5 Chinese women who committed suicide. Li Qing's boat soon arrived not far from the escort ship. The exploded frigate was tilted, and many police officers were floating on the sea in life jackets. There were also 2 rubber lifeboats, which were full of people. Crow and others leaned directly on the steel plate of the guardrail and fired a burst of bullets at the bottom. Toot, tut, tut. A group of people simply treated their rifles as machine guns. The police officers on the rubber boat were not to be outdone and fired at the people on the boat. Unfortunately, Crow and others were behind the bunker, and most of the bullets hit the steel plate. But they were miserable. The rubber boat was deflated, and a group of people floated on the sea. Crow and others followed the burning fire of the escort ship and began to shoot one by one like shooting at a target. About 10 minutes later, nearly 100 Javanese corpses were floating on the surrounding sea. "Okay, let's go," Li Qing ordered. "The ship on the opposite side should also be on its way. If we don't leave, it might be too late." Zhang Guishan nodded, found the correct direction and started driving towards the northeast at full speed. Sailing day and night, we refueled in Beli County on the way, and finally arrived at the port of Xia, Liaoning Province in the early morning of the third day. "How is the situation in Liaoning Province?" Li Qing took a sip of water and asked while sitting in the speeding car. "Brother, the situation in Liaoning Province is better than that in other provinces and cities. After all, most of them are Chinese, and the Javanese still dare not go too far. But it is very limited. Now some Javanese have begun to attack Chinese communities in an organized way." The younger brother who came to pick up Li Qing sighed and said, "Although the situation in Biba City is better than that in Jakarta D, it is only in comparison. Now basically all Chinese industries have been attacked. Even New World's rubber plantations across Java have been subject to constant attacks. In other words, someone in the New World has a gun, otherwise the outcome is really hard to say. Hong Kong movies, I can see the loyalty value, I am not panicked at all." Author, Ban Wanqing Buletin Liang. Chapter 294. Late at night, the Javanese military received a call for help from the police escort ship. When it was light, the military ship arrived at the coordinates of the escort ship's call for help. The soldiers on the ship looked at the dozen bodies floating on the sea in surprise, and more bodies were washed away by the waves. From a distance, they could see orange life jackets floating and sinking on the sea. "What's going on?" the captain shouted in surprise. A few hours later, the materials about the attack on the police escort ship were placed on the desk of Vice Admiral Hatto. "You mean the Coast Guard 404 escort ship was attacked by an unknown ship?" Hatto looked at the materials and looked at the investigators in surprise. "Vice Admiral Hatto, the unknown ship fired 2 torpedoes, one of which hit the right side of the ship, causing water to enter the cabin. The second torpedo hit the right rear side of the ship, causing the escort ship to explode." The investigator pointed to the photo of the complete escort ship and explained it to Hatto in detail. "What about the casualties?" "All the personnel on the escort ship died, except for a few who drowned. Most of them died from being shot." Hatto listened to the report and looked gloomy. "You mean, they were shot by people on the unknown ship?" The investigator nodded, and it was a playful shooting. "Many people were shot several times, but the fatal wounds were all on the forehead, as if what, say?" "It seems that the other party is not in a hurry to kill people. First, they broke their arms to make people unable to move, and then shot them in the head. This way of playing with prey to shoot people is like revenge, yes, revenge." The investigator thought for a while and said. Hatto was stunned for a moment. Revenge. He suddenly thought of the recent massacre of Chinese people instigated by the military and the government. Could it be the Chinese? Impossible. No Chinese has this kind of strength. When Hatto was suspicious, the chief of the D police station in Jakarta came to Nik village with his nose covered. Java is in the tropics, and within a day, the corpses began to smell, not to mention the whole village. The Jakarta D police received a call at noon. When they heard that the Javanese had died, they immediately took action to investigate. "Chief, 523 people in Nik village are dead." A police officer saw the chief coming and hurried over to report. "What? All dead?" the chief asked in surprise. "The whole village was slaughtered. No wonder the police received a call last night saying that there were gunshots. But the police didn't pay any attention to it. It's normal for the thugs to have a few homemade guns. Well, the other party is too cruel. They didn't even let the children go, and even killed dogs. All 24 dogs in the village were killed. The police officer said angrily. The police chief was very upset. What the hell is this person? Such a big thing, and he still has time to count the number of dogs killed. Have you found any clues? Several people at the head of the village had their throats cut by sharp weapons, and it seems that the means were sophisticated. The people in this yard were shot to death. What surprised me was that 5 Chinese were executed. The bullets were obviously shot from the back of the head. The police officer pointed to the 5 Chinese on the ground and said, "By the way, we also found several cars in the woods outside the village. After checking, they were all Chinese. Those Chinese are dead." The police officer signaled with his eyes, and the chief also knew what he meant, so he didn't ask. But on the small road outside the village, there are several off-road vehicles with punctured tires parked. The license plates have been removed. Through the chassis numbers, it was found that they were all stolen vehicles. Nothing can be found for the time being. The chief touched his chin and nodded. The man on the other side was meticulous and a terrible opponent. Massacre of the village, execution, leaving no one alive, the chief murmured. He seemed to have caught something, but he just couldn't remember what the connection was. Is it related to the massacre of the Chinese? Is it revenge by the Chinese? An incredible idea appeared in the mind of the police chief. Then he shook his head. Since the massacre of Chinese people, there has been no organized resistance from the Chinese people. It should be impossible, right? Director, the latest news is that the Coast Guard 404 frigate was attacked, 102 colleagues on board were killed, and the frigate was sunk. The deputy hurried over and finally caught his breath and said. The police chief's jaw dropped in surprise. Who is it? Have you found it? According to the military's speculation, it is very likely a revenge action organized by the Chinese. The police chief looked at the rows of corpses covered by white cloth behind him in surprise. Things seem to be a bit big. Li Qing has arrived at the manor in Biba, and he has a general understanding of the situation in Liaonia province. Now the massacre of Chinese people instigated by the Javanese side is getting more and more intense. The Javanese military and the government jointly covered up the massacre of Chinese people, but some overseas reporters have begun to report it, which has caused a lot of impact worldwide. Li Qing thought for a moment and called Tian Yangsheng. Hey, Yangsheng, you arrange for mercenaries to come to Java Liaonia province now. On the phone, Li Qing asked Tian Yangsheng and others to bring the trained mercenaries to North Pakistan, and asked them to transport all the weapons in stock. He also mobilized funds to purchase a large number of air defense missile systems and coastal defense guns. The most important point is that Li Qing asked Tian Yangsheng to get a nuclear warhead no matter how much it costs. Of course, the nuclear warhead is mainly for deterrence. Unless the two sides are dead, he will not use the nuclear warhead. Brother, do you want to fight a war? Tian Yangsheng on the other end swallowed and asked in a low voice. After a long silence, the voice of the elder brother Li Qing came from the microphone. If necessary, it will be a war. Beep beep. There was a busy tone on the phone. Tian Yangsheng breathed a sigh of relief, with a firm look in his eyes. War? Then fight a war. After hanging up the phone, Li Qing called a few backbones. You guys have been with me the longest. The action later is very dangerous. If we win the bet, we will be the uncrowned king here. If we lose the bet, you will accompany me to kill the devils. Li Qing chuckled. Brother, how to do it? You tell me. Crow was a little excited when he heard Li Qing's words. Crow, who often follows Li Qing, knows that his elder brother must have a big plan. Yes, brother, you tell me. Gao Jin said with gritted teeth. Along the way, he saw the miserable plight of the Chinese, who were no different from piglets, and some Javanese even took pleasure in killing the Chinese. This made him, who had once been a soldier, hate the Javanese very much. Others also echoed, saying that they would fight wherever the eldest brother pointed. Li Qing looked around at his brothers with satisfaction and smiled. Then he turned his back and stretched out his right palm, covering the Java map on the wall, the location of Liaonia province. Taking advantage of this Javanese massacre riot, I want to take Liaonia province. Hong Kong movies, I can see the loyalty value, I am not panicked at all. Author, Ban Wanqing Buletin Liang. Chapter 295. Everyone was stunned for a moment when they heard what Big Brother Li Qing said, but then their blood boiled. In the past few years, under the leadership of Big Brother Li Qing, New World has grown from nothing to a multinational group radiating Southeast Asia and East Asia from a Hong Kong gang. Every major decision was correct, bringing New World to new heights again and again. Now he has made a new major decision, and New World is moving towards a higher level. Take over Liaonia province. Crow's eyes were red with excitement. Take over Liaonia province. Gao Jing clenched his fists, and suddenly felt that the situation at this time was the same as when his ancestors started their business with great difficulty. The difference is that the ancestors recovered the lost land, while they are opening up new territory. What is favorable to us now is that the domestic situation in Java is severe, and the massacre of Chinese has made the contradiction between Chinese and Javanese irreconcilable. If we rise up now, there will be countless Chinese who will respond. But the disadvantage is that most Chinese have not received military training. Once the Javanese army comes, it will be difficult to resist. In addition, in terms of weapons, there is a shortage of weapons now, and we have to wait for a while for our own weapons. Li Qing explained the pros and cons of the current situation to several key brothers. Indeed, if we attack cities and plunder land, we must not do it like the underworld used to rob territories. Only by knowing ourselves and the enemy can we win every battle. Li Qing thought for a while, and then said, Gao Jin, you take people to explore the arsenal in Biba City. Qian Dan, Biba, you are familiar with taking people to collect Chinese. As long as they can hold guns, we will accept them. Crow, Gishan, you two take people to make a batch of bombs. Others. Li Qing arranged the tasks in an orderly manner, which was also what he thought about on the ship these 2 days. He fully combined the experience of the uprisings of his ancestors and thought about everything he could think of. Everyone responded, nodded to Li Qing, and began to make arrangements according to his instructions. After everyone left, Li Qing showed a tired look on his face. He was a little tired for planning such an important thing for the first time. He should have read more military books in his previous life. He now has to think about more than just the present. According to the comparison of strength, he knows that it is impossible to compete with Java. The proportion of Chinese in Java is also smaller than that of Javanese, so it is impossible to completely destroy Java unless there is support from external forces. So Li Qing thinks that the best outcome is to occupy Liaonia province, and then use public opinion pressure to put pressure on the Javanese government, so that Java will be afraid and dare not use large-scale weapons to fight. In the end, if there is a nuclear threat, with that big killer, Java will not dare to wrestle with him. Li Qing closed his eyes and began a short rest. The arsenal is located in the southeast of North Ba City, not far from a Javanese military camp. Gao Jin and his companions took advantage of the night to sneak close to the arsenal. This arsenal is about 3 meters high, with a wire mesh about 1 meter high on the wall, and a high voltage warning on it. There are ventilation holes made of 2 cm steel bars on the outer wall. According to Gao Jin's estimate, the thickness of the outer wall is about 1 meter. The searchlight on the sentry tower in the courtyard kept patrolling back and forth, and the sentries could be vaguely seen patrolling on it. The most important point is that the arsenal is less than 100 meters away from the military camp. If there is any movement, the other side will react immediately. Gao Jin frowned. According to the existing weapons and numbers of his people, it is impossible to force an attack. Then he led people to explore the military camp. There are more than 10 buildings in the military camp. According to Gao Jin's estimate, there should be no less than 500 people in the military camp, that is, about 2 camps of people. The method of forceful attack is not advisable. After exploring the situation, he did not dare to stay for long, and rushed back to the manor at night. At this time, a large number of Chinese people gathered in the manor, with more or less injuries on their bodies. Some looked numb, while some young people looked hateful and kept chewing the food in their hands. Gao Jin was stunned when he saw this scene. Why are there so many people? It is roughly estimated that there are about 1,000 Chinese sitting on the ground in the manor, most of them are men. Because there are no Chinese women on the street at all, either hiding or being abducted by the Javanese. Brother Kyandan, it's amazing. So many people have gathered in just a few hours. Gao Jin smiled and walked to Zhang Kyandan and said. Zhang Kyandan looked at Gao Jin and smiled bitterly. In fact, there are more behind. Alas, the Chinese are too miserable. When Zhang Kyandan was gathering Chinese, he saw too many tragedies. After the Javanese, there was really no grass left. He saw Chinese women with their breasts cut off, and saw living people thrown into the fire and burned to death. There are too many tragic things. Let's go to see the eldest brother. Zhang Kyandan and Gao Jin walked into the villa side by side. Li Qing sat on the sofa, with the ashtray in front of him full of cigarette butts. Seeing the two brothers coming, he smiled, and asked, I heard a lot of noise outside. It seems that a lot of Chinese have been rounded up. Brother, there are more behind. There are almost 1,000 people coming one after another, and many Chinese heard that we are rounding up Chinese and are on their way. Li Qing's eyes flashed with joy when he heard this. These are all new forces. Without them, the next step cannot be taken. What about Ajin? How is the arsenal? Li Qing turned his head to Gao Jin. Gao Jin told him what he had found out. Li Qing shook his head. It seems that a strong attack is impossible. After pondering for a long time, Li Qing knew that his current weakness was in weapons. It was impossible to take down Biba with only the weapons at hand. Tomorrow night, Crow and Gishan, you two will lead people to blow up all the important institutions in Biba City, especially the State Power Company, Traffic Management Bureau, Police Station, Government Building. I want to paralyze the entire Biba. Gao Jin immediately understood the idea of his elder brother Li Qing. It turned out that his elder brother wanted to make a feint to the east and attack the west, and mobilize all the troops in Biba City. The important departments of Biba City were bombed, and the government would definitely ask the military for help. It would not be difficult to take down the arsenal at that time. Qian Dan, Ajin, you will take some young and strong Chinese people tomorrow night and go directly to the military camp next to the arsenal. While the military camp is empty. Li Qing told the two the following plan. 5 minutes later, the two walked out of the villa and began to select young people to prepare for tomorrow's action. The next day, at night, in the city of Biba. The massacre of Chinese people has been going on for 2 days. Now there is no Chinese on the street. There are only thugs wearing face scarves wandering in the street in groups of 3 or 4. Ah, it's so late, and there are still large troops. A thug pointed at about 7 or 8 people who got off the car in front. Yes, it seems that there is a lot of gains with big and small bags. Let's go and take a look, another laughed. He walked towards the opposite side, but the closer he got, the more he felt something was wrong. It seemed that the opposite side had guns in their hands. Oh no, they are Chinese. Bang bang. After 2 gunshots, 2 people were shot in the middle of their eyebrows and fell straight to the ground. Crow blew the smoke on the barrel of the gun. 11, 12. He and Zhang Gishan split up and killed people while walking along the way. In front of them was the State Power Company. As long as the substation inside was blown up, the whole city would be without power. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Hong Kong movies, I can see the loyalty value, I am not panicked at all. Author, Ban Wanqing Buletin Liang. Chapter 296. Zhang Qiandan, Gao Jin, his younger brothers and some Chinese boys hid not far from the military camp. The newly recruited Chinese had no guns in their hands, but they all had blades, looking at the military camp with hatred. Among the many Javanese who killed the Chinese, there were also soldiers. Suddenly, the lights in the military camp and the armory not far away went out, and the boys behind just wanted to get up. But Gao Jin scolded, "Don't move, lie down." A minute or two later, the lights in the armory and the military camp lit up at the same time, and they had backup power. It was not until about half an hour later that the soldiers in the military camp began to gather, and soon they started to drive out of the military camp in military vehicles. Gao Jin crawled to the side of the military camp with a few people and observed carefully. There were only a few soldiers left inside. "Brother Qiandan, I will take people to cut off their communication lines." Gao Jin is worthy of being a person who has participated in the war. He went straight to the key point. Now any news from the military camp will not be transmitted for a while. Seeing Gao Jin's gesture, Zhang Qiandan knew that the communication line was completely cut off. Gao Jin led his men and quietly sneaked into the military camp. It was already midnight, and the soldiers on duty were urgently woken up to stand guard. They began to feel confused. A soldier heard a slight movement, looked outside, then yawned and shrank back, and continued to close his eyes and doze. Several Chinese men walked barefoot without making any sound, took out the blade and stabbed the soldier's throat fiercely. The same thing happened in various parts of the military camp. Zhang Qiandan arranged several Chinese to deal with one soldier for fear of accidents. With the help of the elite brothers, nothing went wrong. He neatly dealt with the dozen Javanese soldiers left in the military camp. Zhang Qiandan took a look and couldn't help twitching his mouth. The Javanese soldiers died miserably, and some even had their heads chopped off. It can also be seen that the Chinese hate the Javanese. Then he searched for some guns from all over the military camp and armed some of the Chinese. After occupying the military camp, Zhang Qiandan asked everyone to change into the uniforms of Javanese soldiers. And remote-controlled bombs were installed in various places in the military camp. Gao Jin also led people to search everywhere. If there were any survivors, it would be difficult to attack the arsenal. "Come out." Gao Jin walked into the toilet and saw a soldier hiding inside. "I have never killed Chinese people. Don't kill me." The soldier obviously got up at night and became a fish that slipped through the net. Looking at the uniform on the soldier, Gao Jin's eyes turned and smiled and said, "I won't kill you, as long as you listen." Gao Jin took the remaining Javanese soldier and planned to trick the arsenal open. "If you want to survive, it's not impossible. As long as you can open the door of the arsenal, I will let you go." The soldier was stunned when he heard this. "Really? More real than diamonds?" "Sir, there is actually a secret passage leading to the arsenal under the military camp. You don't have to go through the gate." The Javanese soldier swallowed and said carefully, "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" "You didn't ask." Zhang Qiandan, Gao Jin, and others didn't expect to have an unexpected gain. Who would go through the door if there was a secret passage? According to Li Qing's arrangement, they planned to put on the clothes of Javanese soldiers and try to trick the door of the arsenal. Since they couldn't trick it, they had to think of another way. The group carefully came to the secret passage. The height of the secret passage was about 1.8 meters. It was full of spider webs and should have been unused for a long time. Out of caution, Gao Jin stared at the Javanese soldier and asked, "How did you know this secret passage?" "My comrades and I found it by accident. We often drink here. One time, I was curious and walked to the end and found that the end was the arsenal. Gao Jin looked at the railroad tracks on the ground again, thinking, it seems that this is a passage for military leaders to smuggle arms. Alas, a big rat. The group came to the end of the secret passage and opened the iron door. It turned out that this was the utility room of the arsenal, which was full of various sundries. How many guards are there? About 30 or so, the Javanese soldier answered in a low voice. It was midnight, and most of the guards were sleeping, with only a few sentinels on the tower doing routine patrols. They were also very lazy, taking naps in groups of 3 or 4 leaning against the wall. No one would have thought that a group of Chinese would come out quietly. I'll cut off the communication line, and you try to use knives. Keep an eye on him, and kill him immediately if he dares to make a noise. Gao Jin gave an instruction and ran out. Zhang Qiandan led a team of people, drew his knife, and quietly came to the barracks in the arsenal. The snoring in the barracks was one after another, and everyone outside the door could hear it clearly. Kill them all, don't leave any alive. Zhang Qiandan said in a low voice, and everyone nodded when he heard it. Especially the Chinese who had just joined, their eyes revealed impatience, as if the enemy who killed their parents and sisters was right in front of them. The men walked in one by one on tiptoe. After a while, the whole barracks was filled with muffled groans and the sound of blood dripping on the ground. Not long after, several people walked out of the barracks covered in blood, and their grass-green military uniforms were stained dark red by blood. But everyone had a smile on their face. Gao Jin hurried over, go and take down the sentry. The communication line is broken, and the message cannot be sent out for the time being. You go with them. Gao Jin pointed at the Javanese soldier and said. The Javanese soldier hesitated and walked forward. After walking a few steps, he felt a chill in his chest, and saw the tip of the knife exposed from his chest. Those who are not of my race must have different hearts. Didn't you notice that the watch you are wearing is a Shanghai brand? Didn't you kill the Chinese? I don't believe it. The Javanese soldier on the sentry tower was directly dealt with by his younger brothers. The Biba city arsenal was completely in their hands. Li Qing also received the news and came to the arsenal in person. The warehouses where the arsenal was stored were slowly opened, and various arsenals were displayed inside, and the number exceeded their imagination. Li Qing looked calm when he saw these arsenals. Compared with Mao's place, these arsenals were nothing. Except for him, everyone cheered. With these arsenals, it would not be a problem to take over Biba city. After all, Biba city is the capital of Liania province, and most of the arsenals are gathered here. Even if there are arsenals in other counties and cities, there will not be too many. Get ready, the troops that went out will be back soon, and there is more than one military camp in Biba city. Li Qing said calmly. A group of people quickly calmed down and began to familiarize themselves with the use of weapons, especially the Chinese who had just touched the gun. The younger brothers began to teach them how to use guns. Whether to aim or not was another matter. Now they just had to not shoot casually like the African brothers. Li Qing stood on the sentry tower, looking steadily in the direction of the military camp. In the distance, the lights of cars were dim and faint. The Javanese army returned to the military camp. Hong Kong movies, I can see the loyalty value, I am not panicked at all. Author, Ban Wanqing Buletin Liang. Chapter 297. Gao Jin led a team armed with live ammunition and ambushed around the military camp, waiting for the opportunity to attack. The Chinese behind him all looked nervous. After all, they had never been to the battlefield and were a little uneasy. Here we go. The Javanese military vehicle drove towards the military camp, and the officer in the co-pilot looked at the camp in front strangely. Damn, where are the sentries? A bunch of trash, they only know how to sleep this time, no matter what, they must rectify the military discipline. Although the military discipline in Java has always been bad, it really shouldn't be so slack. The officer jumped out of the car. "Damn, take out the lazy sleepers, I want to beat them to death." I was originally angry at the incompetence of the government, and now I was angry at my own soldiers. I just pulled out the belt from my waist and planned to discipline them. But there was an explosion in his ears, and the huge air wave lifted him up and hit him heavily on the windshield of the military vehicle. He only felt pain all over his body, his eardrum was obviously damaged, and a tinnitus made his head split. He managed to stand up straight and looked at the camp. What's going on? The whole camp was engulfed in a sea of fire, with broken limbs and arms scattered on the ground, and even white brains still wriggling. It was so similar to the massacre of the Chinese yesterday. Then he saw people wearing the same military uniforms as them, rushing in with guns and shooting at people. The soldiers who survived the explosion were also killed by guns. In a hurry, he pulled out the pistol from his waist, but before he opened the safety, he was hit by a bullet and fell to the ground. Then he saw a young-looking Chinese boy, holding a gun and looking at him nervously. "No. Don't!" The officer stretched out his hands to stop him. But the next moment, he was knocked to the ground by a burst of bullets from the Chinese boy. The soldiers were caught off guard. The sudden explosion caused them to suffer heavy casualties. They were also hit by intensive firepower and could not organize an effective counterattack at all. As time went on, the sound of gunfire in the barracks became less and less, and hundreds of Javanese soldiers were completely wiped out. But the Chinese side also suffered losses. Nearly a dozen people died, all of whom were Chinese who had just been summoned. But most of them were killed by Javanese soldiers because they did not listen to orders and rushed too far forward. Those who survived the battle more or less understood teamwork. Now time is urgent. Gao Jin has no time to improve their combat literacy systematically. He can only give a simple explanation and let these people learn battlefield survival skills on the edge of life and death. Everyone, clean up the battlefield. If there are survivors, make up the gun. Then the sound of make-up guns sounded intermittently. An hour later, hundreds of people drove the captured military vehicles back to the manor. Most of the Chinese soldiers in the car who had been baptized by war began to tremble involuntarily. This is a symptom of overexcitement of the sympathetic nerves and excessive secretion of adrenaline. These people turned directly from prey to hunters, which made them feel extremely excited and showed a bloodthirsty cold light in their eyes. Some people even felt that they had not killed enough and wanted to kill more. Gao Jin also discovered the situation. For those who went to the battlefield for the first time, they all had these behaviors to a greater or lesser extent. It was the same when he was in the El Mountain offensive and defensive battle. His comrades rushed up one by one without caring about their lives, thinking in their hearts that they wanted to kill all the enemies. From now on, you are real soldiers. Remember one thing on the battlefield, that is, obey orders. Next time, I will lead you to a greater victory. Gao Jin encouraged everyone at the right time. The eyes of the people in the car became much firmer. They originally just wanted to live. Since the Javanese didn't want them to live, they would bite off a piece of each other's flesh even if they died. When they arrived at the manor, it was already 4 o'clock in the morning. The other Chinese in the manor looked at the young man with blood on his body and kept jumping off the military vehicle in surprise. Those who were closer could still smell the strong smell of blood. Big leopard. Second strong. A few familiar shouts appeared among the Chinese, which made them come back to their senses, and the depressing atmosphere suddenly relaxed. A group of people happily surrounded them, touching the guns enviously and asking something. "Xiao Feng? Xiao Feng? Have you seen my Xiao Feng?" An anxious voice sounded from the crowd. Several young men holding guns looked a little unnatural when they heard the voice. Xiao Feng was one of the casualties. "Auntie, Xiao Feng was accidentally shot and died, the body is in the military vehicle behind." The woman was stunned and looked at them with disbelief, then stumbled towards the military vehicle behind. She kept searching for Xiaofeng's figure. My Xiaofeng, the shrill cry made people feel sad, and some emotionally fragile people also shed tears. Why, he is only 15 years old, still a child. Why did you send him to the battlefield? These children are the future of the Chinese. The woman's cry moved all the Chinese. Everyone has children, and no one wants their children to die on the battlefield. The atmosphere became more and more depressed, and the scene became quiet. Da-da-da footsteps sounded. Big brother. Big brother. Li Qing came over from not far away, and all the younger brothers bowed their heads to greet him. He came in front of the woman and looked coldly at the woman who was slumped on the ground. Future? If they don't pick up guns, the Chinese will have no future. When this voice came out, all the Chinese felt deafening. Yes, if they did not fight this time, the Chinese would still be massacred like animals 30 years ago. Establishing a place where only Chinese people live is the future. Guns are the future. Revolution is the future. Li Qing's voice spread throughout the manor, and everyone's expression began to firm up and clenched their fists. Revolution! 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 Huge sound waves hovered over the manor, and everyone understood a truth, that only by fighting can they survive. Only with revolution, Chinese people will not be slaughtered. Everyone looked at Li Qing's back with reverence until he disappeared into the darkness. Only Li Qing's old brothers knew that those who came out of the darkness were either demons or gods. But no matter whether Li Qing was a god or a demon, he was their eldest brother who they firmly followed. Li Qing walked into the villa with a frown. Although he got the arms of Biba City, the remaining 4 military camps in Biba City had probably received the news by now. There are more and more Chinese gathering in the manor, and it is urgent to form a military system. In addition, the manor is no longer suitable for collecting Chinese, and a place for the elderly, the weak, women and children to live must be found. Separate them from the soldiers under their command, otherwise their morale will be affected. Hong Kong movies, I can see the loyalty value, I am not panicked at all. Author, Ban Wanqing Buletin Liang. Chapter 298. According to Gao Jin's suggestion, Li Qing decided to continue the 3-3 system of the early army of the motherland, that is, the brigade has 3 regiments, the regiment has 3 battalions, the battalion has 3 platoons, and the platoon has 3 squads. As for the divisions, armies, army groups, and fronts, we will talk about it later. The main reason is that the current number of people does not allow it. There are only more than 2,800 Chinese men in total, which is not as many as a reinforced regiment. In comparison, the Javanese army is much more petty, with a standard battalion of only 250 people, which is really half-baked. Li Qing calculated that there are only more than 2,000 soldiers in the remaining 4 military camps. Although the military literacy of his side is not good, the firepower is sufficient and the surprise attack makes the victory very sure. Time is urgent, Gao Jin and others reorganized the existing Chinese overnight. Among them, the squad leader, platoon leader, and battalion commander are temporarily served by the old brothers in the New World, and they teach the Chinese recruits how to use firearms. After a lot of work, it can be regarded as a rough formation of the army. From a distance, it was still a mess, obviously a mob. Fortunately, the Chinese in the whole Biba city are gathering here, and there are more and more new forces. As long as there are enough arms, the Javanese troops in Biba city can be piled up to kill. Li Qing knew clearly that what they had to do now was to take Biba city before the Javanese troops came. As for how to take down the other 4 military camps, Li Qing thought of encircling the point and attacking the reinforcements. First, attack the number 3 military camp closest to here, encircle but not annihilate, and the other 3 military camps will definitely come to help after receiving the news. Bury mines on the road and catch them off guard. In the absence of shelter, the other side will definitely suffer heavy losses. Li Qing decided to lead the team himself in this operation. Only if he wins this battle can he implement his next plan. If he loses this battle, then Li Qing can only implement Plan B and take his people out of Liania province and go to Liania Islands. In the early morning, the sky took away the last trace of darkness. Li Qing, who had just rested for 2 hours, walked out of the villa. Zhang Qiandan, Crow, Gao Jin, and others came over quickly. Their eyes were bloodshot, obviously they had not rested all night. Li Qing made detailed deployment, asking Zhang Qiandan, Crow, and Gao Jin to set up ambushes on 3 different roads respectively. No matter where the other 3 camps came from, they would be ambushed. Li Qing personally led the first camp to attack the third camp. Although letters had been sent to the brothers scattered in Southeast Asian countries in the New World, they could not arrive for a while. Time waits for no one, we must take Biba City today. Brothers, these days, the Javanese massacre has killed Chinese people. Some of you have lost your parents, some have lost your brothers and sisters, and some have even lost your children. Watching them being killed by Javanese monkeys. I have come all the way from Jakarta and have seen many tragedies, including Chinese women being raped in the streets, Chinese babies being thrown into the sea of fire, and Chinese people having their tendons cut off. Javanese monkeys treat us as non-human beings and openly offer to buy the lives of all of us Chinese. What is the difference between this and the extermination of Indians by white people in the United States? Now the tragic experience of Indians is about to happen to us. Do you want to be like them? Li Qing stood on the high platform and said loudly. Despite the simple conditions and the lack of microphones, everyone could hear Li Qing's angry shouts. When all the Chinese heard Li Qing's words, their faces showed resentment. The experiences of the past few days flashed before their eyes. No. We want to kill all the monkeys. One of them shouted, and more people shouted. The voices gradually changed from chaotic to uniform. Kill all the monkeys, angry roars came from the mouths of the Chinese. Li Qing looked at the scene and nodded in appreciation. The blood in the bones of the Chinese was still there. Rise up, slaves who are suffering from hunger and cold. Rise up, people who are suffering all over the world. The blood in your heart is boiling. We must. Gao Jin blushed and sang the Internationale. This was also Li Qing's order. Although he felt embarrassed, Gao Jin still sang without looking away. Then Zhang Qiandan and Crow also sang along. All the brothers in the New World also sang, and all the Chinese also sang. The loud Internationale floated over the manor. Gao Jin and others sang more and more vigorously, without the initial embarrassment at all, and their emotions were also brought into it. It must be said that the Internationale has such magic. Ahem, especially the DJ version. Everyone seemed to be injected with chicken blood, and they only felt that their blood was boiling, and they looked like they were going to kill all the Javanese monkeys. Let's go. Li Qing looked at the high-spirited Chinese independent regiment and ordered. The newly formed troops walked towards the distance. 2 hours later, Li Qing led a battalion to Java No. 3 military camp, which was closest to the manor. The No. 3 military camp was obviously stronger than the No. 4 military camp that was destroyed yesterday. It was surrounded by 3-meter-high brick and stone walls, and the walls were covered with barbed wire. There were 2 sentry towers in the military camp, with a heavy machine gun on top, and its firepower coverage range was within 100 meters around. There were also soldiers patrolling back and forth around the military camp. When Li Qing saw this situation, he knew that Camp No. 3 must have known the news that Base No. 4 had lost contact. What was good for Li Qing was that Camp No. 3 was not in a very good location, and the surrounding rocks and trees were natural shelters for Li Qing's troops. Li Qing's mind was spinning rapidly. It was not impossible to attack now, but the heavy machine guns on the sentry tower would cause heavy losses on his side, which would not be worth the loss. Aki, take a row of gunners, go around the small road, find a commanding height, and knock down the sentry tower. Remember not to waste the shells, and make them for me at all costs. For Li Qing now, the lives of the Chinese were more important. If he took down Biba City and did not have enough people to defend it, it would be a joke. As for arms, he was originally a big arms dealer, and he could get a large amount of arms at a very low price. In addition, he had just bought an arsenal in Ermao, so the price of arms would be even lower. Aki nodded and pointed at a few gunners. Little leopard, bison, follow me. Aki was an old brother under Li Qing. He had followed him through life and death since the days of the big brother Liang Kun. If his ability was not inferior to Zhang Qiandan and others, he would have been a Hall Master level figure long ago. At this time, in the number 3 military camp not far away, the camp commander with the rank of lieutenant colonel paced anxiously in the liaison room. The number 4 military camp had lost contact for a long time. He reported the situation, but the reply he received was to stay on standby. Since receiving the request for help from the Bibo municipal government last night, he and others also rushed to the scene, but no one was found at the scene. But he felt uneasy in his heart, and the loss of contact with the number 4 military camp today confirmed this intuition. Bang! The sound of the mortar shells falling to the ground and exploding sounded. The guards quickly threw him to the ground, followed by continuous explosions, and the entire number 3 camp was caught in artillery fire. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Hong Kong movies, I can see the loyalty value, I am not panicked at all. Author, Ban Wanqing Buletin Liang. Chapter 299. Li Qing looked at the camp not far away with a telescope. The explosion and flames were flying everywhere. It was obvious that Archie had carried out his order, and the sound of mortars did not stop for a moment. Soldiers in the entire military camp suffered heavy casualties, and the sentry tower was knocked down. Some monkey soldiers lay motionless on the ground holding their heads. The bombardment lasted for about 10 minutes before stopping. The Javanese monkeys on the opposite side immediately organized people to move in the direction of Archie and others. Li Qing waved, and the men of the 1st Battalion stood up and ran towards the military camp. The 3x3 formation formed is not very standard, but it is still enough to deal with monkeys. At least the casualty rate will be greatly reduced. Li Qing squinted his eyes as he observed the number 4 military camp. As expected, although the regular army suffered heavy losses, they could still organize an effective defense. The two sides have already begun a head-on confrontation. After all, most of the 1st Battalion are novices who have just entered the battlefield, and many people fell down just after the confrontation. The large number of people temporarily suppressed the monkeys' firepower. But the other side was not completely defenseless. 2 machine guns were set up, forming a crossfire net for a while, which caused heavy losses to the 1st Battalion. Sniper! Kill him! Li Qing pointed to the position of the machine gun. He had already prepared snipers on his side, waiting to shoot at the opponent's fire points. Bang bang! After 2 shots, the opponent's heavy firepower misfired. Second row, lead people to flank them from the side. Li Qing waited for the 1st platoon to attract enemy fire and immediately arranged for the 2nd platoon to move out. In the number 4 military camp, the lieutenant commander shook his head and pushed away the guard pressing on him. Someone is coming, the enemy is attacking. He pulled out his pistol and carefully looked through the window at the battle outside. I saw dense crowds of people rushing towards the camp, and shouts of killing could be heard from inside the house. Hurry, call for help. Looking at the falling soldiers outside the window, he took a breath of cold air. It was the rebels who were calling. Although he is not merciless in killing Chinese people, he has never won against the brutal anti-government armed forces. The battle lasted for more than half an hour. Due to the plowing of the ground by artillery shells, the opponent did not organize an effective counterattack at all. Even Li Qing didn't expect to capture the number 3 military camp so easily. It seems that this Javanese monkey army is really rubbish. I'm afraid it can't compete with the YDY army. You know, during World War II, the 400,000-strong YDY army could not defeat the 50,000-strong Y army in North Africa. It became the laughing stock of the entire world and was called the worst army ever. Li Qing's original idea was to cripple Camp Number 3 and then surround it for reinforcements, but he ended up using too much force and was defeated directly. What should we do? Li Qing frowned and walked into the messy Number 4 military camp under the protection of the security squad. Captain. We captured an officer. The soldier named Xiao Beizai escorted an officer with the rank of lieutenant colonel to Li Qing with a smile on his face. As the temporary instructor of the independent regiment, Gao Jin asked everyone to call Li Qing captain. Although it sounded awkward, Li Qing did not refuse. You can't let people call you boss. That would be too unserious. The lieutenant colonel twisted dishonestly, which rebel are you? In fact, he had many questions in his mind. The people on the other side seemed to be composed of Chinese. When did Java have an army composed entirely of Chinese? You must know that Chinese are not allowed to join the army or participate in politics in Java. If there were Chinese troops, there would be no massacre of Chinese people. Li Qing glanced at the officer and said disdainfully, rebels. That's right. He ignored him and said to the little leopard, force him to ask for help from other military camps. If you keep talking, chop off his fingers one by one. Since total annihilation means total annihilation, this officer arrived just in time to continue the encirclement and reinforcement plan. Little Leopard and others excitedly dragged the officer towards the communication room. The entire 1st Battalion, under the command of Li Qing, began to clean the battlefield and treat wounded soldiers. After a short count, more than 600 Javanese monkeys in Camp Number 3 were wiped out, and more than 100 casualties occurred on our side. Li Qing nodded. The casualties were within an acceptable range, which meant they were caught off guard. Otherwise, there would have been more casualties. But the fighting ability of Javanese monkeys is just that. Even if they can be wiped out by a group of rabble, they are not much better. After a while, the little leopard dragged out the officer who had his fingers and toes cut off. Captain, the mission is accomplished. After speaking, he gave a non-standard military salute. Li Qing was so happy that he gave him a slap in the face. Good boy. I'll leave him to you. The little leopard was overjoyed when he heard this. He pulled out the dog-leg knife from his waist and stabbed the officer's 5th limb. The painful officer rolled on the ground. Little Leopard's sister was killed by a Javanese monkey, so her hatred for monkeys has penetrated deep into her bones. Despite his young age, his tactics are really dirty. Starting yesterday, he was no longer satisfied with killing monkeys with one shot, but turned to killing them mainly. The 1st Battalion searched Camp 3 carefully, and to Li Qing's surprise, there were quite a few good things. Needless to say, weapons and ammunition, there are actually a lot of military supplies in reserve. Boxes of compressed biscuits, several hundred kilograms of canned meat, several quilts and mosquito nets, and 50 barrels of gasoline. The most important thing is that there are several 80% new military vehicles, so they don't have to walk back now. Boom! The signal flare sounded, and Li Qing knew that other people's resistance operations had begun. The momentum of the 1st Battalion was strong. Aki ran to Li Qing and asked softly, Captain, do we need support? Li Qing shook his head. He arranged this way for training, so that the new recruits could be baptized by the fire of war and become real soldiers. Li Qing was right, but one thing was beyond his expectation, that is, 2 Java monkey troops took the same road. The number of reinforcements far exceeded the number of Chinese ambushes. Fortunately, the Chinese troops were commanded by Gao Jin, who had rich combat experience. As soon as the vehicles of the monkey vanguard were blown up by mines, Gao Jin immediately led his men to blow up the armored vehicles of the troops behind. The monkey troops were caught in a dilemma. Gao Jin slowly led his men to fight guerrilla warfare, shooting here and there, which made the Java monkeys confused. When Crow and others came to help, they steadily ate the group of monkeys. Zhang Qiandan took down the reinforcements of the number 1 military camp without any waves. When Wu Ya killed the last person, Li Qing, who was a few kilometers away, felt his mind move. An expression of disbelief appeared on his face. The bottleneck is actually loosened. He felt something entering his body from nowhere, and his physical fitness, which had not been growing, actually had a slight and undetectable growth. And the entry system had also changed. He looked up at the soldiers behind him, and there were actually blurred entries above their heads. Zhaoqi, loyalty value 100%, good at. Wu Kai, loyalty value 70%, good at. He knew that the blurred part behind would slowly appear, because his energy accumulation was not enough now. Li Qing laughed, and now he understood that it was not that his system crashed, nor that he encountered a bottleneck. It was that he and his men killed too few people. Hong Kong movies, I can see the loyalty value, I am not panicked at all. Author, Ban Wanqing Buletin Liang. Chapter 300. Li Qing led the entire regiment and took down the remaining military camps while the iron was hot. Because the military camps were empty of combat power, they took them down without much effort and harvested a large number of military supplies. It can be said that there is no force in the entire Biba city that can compete with Li Qing's troops. Qian Dan, Crow, you will drive out the Java monkeys in Biba city from tomorrow. Remember to clear out all those who do not leave Biba city. Li Qing's idea is very simple, that is, to make the entire Biba city a gathering place for all Javanese Chinese first. Now the Chinese from all over the country have not received the news. Once they know that there are Chinese armed forces in Biba city, Li Qing believes that the Chinese with blood will definitely rush to surrender. Crow licked his lips after hearing this. You know, he didn't show mercy to the Javanese monkeys in Hong Kong back then. Gao Jin, find a new resettlement site in Biba city. This place is no longer suitable for living. Li Qing sighed and looked at the overcrowded manor and said. More and more Chinese got the news and came to the manor with their families. Not only was the manor too small, but there were also Chinese tents set up under the large rubber trees outside. Fortunately, after Li Qing and others cleared the military camp, they immediately took over the grain storage center in Biba city, so there was no burden on food for the time being. Otherwise, the food, drink, and defecation of nearly 10,000 people would be a big problem. Gao Jin nodded, knowing that this matter was also imminent. He had to settle the Chinese as soon as possible, and then use the remaining time to train the troops. After all, no one knew when the Javanese troops would arrive. The next day, the first ray of sunlight appeared in the early morning. Crow and Zhang Qiandan each led their troops and couldn't wait to execute Li Qing's orders. At this time, the Javanese monkeys in Biba city were not as active as the day before, but they still gathered in groups of 3 or 2. It was difficult for them to find groups of Chinese now. Hey, I heard gunshots in the suburbs yesterday. I wonder what happened, said a skinny monkey. Me too, damn, the sound of the gunfire has been going on for a long time, is it the army conducting a drill? When you said that, I noticed a problem. When we first started to massacre the Chinese, there were soldiers. Why haven't there been any in the past 2 days? Is there any problem? Why worry about it one by one? If you have that time, you might as well go and find the Chinese pigs. Now the pigs are hiding deeper and deeper. Did they run away? Where can they run? The whole country is massacring them, haha. Hey, aren't those big-headed soldiers coming now? Someone pointed at the military road coming from a distance. Some soldiers in green uniforms jumped off the military vehicles, all holding rifles in their hands. The group was about to go up and say hello. No, why are their skins a little white? One of them noticed the clue and squinted his eyes at the approaching soldiers. Well, they seemed to be Chinese. The monkeys were horrified at this time. They saw the Chinese soldiers running towards them and raised their rifles. They never thought that they were originally hunting Chinese people, but they met hunters when they went out. Run. Some of them were smart and started running to the back. Anyway, as long as they ran faster than others, they would have a greater chance of survival. Crow grinned at the groups of Java monkeys on the opposite side. Free hunting, bah, expulsion is the main thing, and those who don't obey will be killed on the spot. Now the opposite side saw us and didn't say hello, obviously despising us Chinese. You are free to move. The soldiers instantly understood what the commander said, grinned, and raised their guns, and began to look for targets to shoot, just taking this opportunity to practice their shooting skills. Bang! Bang! The sound of gunfire continued to ring in the block, and the Java monkeys screamed and fled in all directions. They finally felt the despair of the Chinese 2 days ago. But now they are even more miserable. At least they still have the lives of Chinese women. This group of killers will not leave any alive. Even Java female monkeys will be killed, as long as they see them, whether male, female, or small, no one will be alive. This situation was happening throughout the entire North Ba city. Gradually, the Javanese monkeys discovered that as long as they left North Ba city, the Chinese army would no longer chase them. So more and more Javanese monkeys began to flee for their lives outside the city with their families. Li Qing also turned a blind eye to the soldiers' actions. After all, tooth for tooth and blood for blood is a Chinese tradition, and good traditions must be passed on. The Javanese military knew about it on the first day when the North Ba city military camp was lost. They were also very troubled by the emergence of unknown anti-government armed forces. The Javanese massacre of Chinese people has been exposed internationally. They are under great pressure and have received a lot of humanitarian condemnation. Even other allies in Southeast Asia expressed dissatisfaction with this incident, and people in their countries were more or less affected. The most important thing is that although their primary goal was achieved, the ultimate goal was still not achieved. The purpose of planning the massacre of Chinese people was to divert the attention of the people and continue to let Xu Ha continue to hold the presidency. Now it seems that the voices against Xu Ha's rule and demanding his resignation have not decreased. In addition, the Chinese anti-government armed forces in Biba City, Liaoning province, really gave the upper echelons a headache. They directly threatened in the domestic media to send troops to wipe out the first Chinese anti-government armed forces in Java. As a result, the whole Javanese nation knew that there was a Chinese anti-government armed force in North Bali, which indirectly led to all the Chinese who were treated unfairly to gather in Riau province. In the northwest of Sumatra, another force began to stir after seeing the news. In fact, in Java, the Javanese account for 42% of the total population, the Sundanese account for 14%, the Madurese account for 7.5%, the Chinese account for only 5%, and there are other ethnic groups such as the Akat. Here we are talking about the Akat people, because there is an organization called the Free Akat Movement in the northwest of Sumatra, which advocates the use of violence to fight for the independence of Akat province. It can be regarded as a scabies of the Javanese government, and it makes some noise from time to time. Java also often goes to encircle and suppress, but the Akat organization is very smart. If you come, I will leave, and if you leave, I will come. In addition, most of the people in Akat province are Akat people, and Java has no way to deal with them. The news that a Chinese anti-government organization had emerged in Riau province made Hassan Kola, the leader of the Free Akat movement, very happy. In addition, there is also the Free Baya movement organization in the West Baya region, which also began to have ideas after hearing the news. The Free Baya movement organization is mainly led by the Baya people, and like the Aceh people, they have been seeking independence. This time, the Javanese exposed the Chinese anti-government armed forces in Riau province, which made other ethnic independence organizations in Javanese have some ideas. Now all eyes are on Riau province. I believe that once the Javanese army is defeated, other ethnic organizations will jump out.